Why did NATO kill Gaddafi? In the annals of history, few leaders have evoked as much fascination, controversy, and intrigue as Muammar Gaddafi, the enigmatic ruler of Libya for over 4 decades. His rise to power, social reforms, advocacy for Pan-Africanism, and eventual downfall continue to captivate minds across the globe. But why was Gaddafi killed by NATO forces? And what does his story reveal about the intersection of power, ideology, and geopolitics? Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to Kilimanjaro News Network. Click the bell icon to be notified for more interesting and in-depth investigations and analyses of events happening throughout the continent and the diaspora. Muammar Gaddafi's rise to power in 1969 was not just a change of leadership, it marked a seismic shift in Libyan politics and society. Gaddafi's coup, which ousted King Idris without bloodshed, was emblematic of a nation reclaiming its sovereignty from Western influences. However, the roots of Gaddafi's ascent run deeper than a mere rejection of colonialism. They lie in the socio-economic disparities that characterized Libyan society under King Idris's rule. Gaddafi capitalized on widespread discontent, particularly among the disenfranchised segments of the population, to rally support for his revolutionary agenda. His promise of social justice and equality resonated with many Libyans who had long suffered under a system that favored the elites and foreign interests over the masses. Thus, Gaddafi's rise to power was not just a political coup but a social revolution that sought to overturn the existing order and build a new Libya based on principles of sovereignty, equality, and self-reliance. Gaddafi's ascent to power was preceded by decades of exploitation and marginalization under the monarchy. King Idris's regime, which was seen as corrupt and beholden to foreign powers, failed to address the needs of the Libyan people, particularly those in rural areas and marginalized communities. The discovery of oil in the 1950s further exacerbated socio-economic inequalities, as foreign companies reaped the benefits of Libya's natural resources while ordinary citizens saw little improvement in their living standards. Gaddafi's coup, therefore, was not just a political upheaval but a popular uprising against decades of oppression and exploitation. His message of national liberation and self-determination struck a chord with many Libyans who yearned for a more just and equitable society. By overthrowing the monarchy and establishing a revolutionary government, Gaddafi signaled a break with the past and a commitment to building a new Libya based on principles of social justice and equality. Gaddafi's regime was characterized by an ambitious program of social and economic reforms aimed at transforming Libya into a modern, egalitarian society. Central to this agenda was the establishment of a comprehensive welfare state that provided free healthcare, education, and housing to all citizens. These initiatives were not merely altruistic gestures but strategic investments in the nation's human capital and social cohesion. By ensuring access to essential services, Gaddafi sought to foster a sense of national unity and solidarity, transcending tribal, regional, and socio-economic divisions. Gaddafi's social reforms undoubtedly improved the lives of many Libyans. While many praised his efforts to improve access to healthcare, education, and housing, Western-backed critics argued that these initiatives were superficial and did little to address underlying structural issues. They accused Gaddafi, describing his rule as authoritarian, claiming it stifled dissent and discouraged political participation, and according to them lacked accountability and transparency. The West used these voices and began to lay the groundwork for future challenges to Gaddafi's authority. Despite these accusations, Gaddafi's social reforms left a lasting impact on Libyan society and one of the best ever seen in any African country. The expansion of healthcare and education services, in particular, helped to improve the quality of life for many Libyans and laid the groundwork for future development. Gaddafi's vision extended far beyond the borders of Libya. It encompassed a fervent commitment to Pan-African unity and liberation. Inspired by the ideals of figures such as Kwame Nkrumah and Malcolm X, Gaddafi sought to position himself as a leading advocate for African solidarity and empowerment. His support for liberation movements across the continent, coupled with generous financial assistance and military aid, earned him admiration from the African community and suspicion from the West. While Africans hailed him as a hero of the African liberation struggle, Westerners and NATO viewed his interventions as opportunistic attempts to extend his influence and consolidate his power. Gaddafi's Pan-African ambitions often clashed with the interests of Western powers, particularly when they threatened to disrupt the status quo or challenge neo-colonial arrangements. The dichotomy between Gaddafi's rhetoric of Pan-Africanism and the realities of his foreign policy underscores the complexities of navigating international relations in a post-colonial world. Gaddafi's Pan-African vision was rooted in his belief that African nations should unite to challenge Western hegemony and assert their independence on the world stage. He saw Libya as a vanguard of this movement and invested heavily in promoting African unity through diplomatic, economic, and military means. Gaddafi's support for liberation movements in countries such as South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Angola earned him widespread acclaim among African leaders and ordinary citizens alike, positioning Libya as a champion of anti-imperialism and self-determination. Gaddafi's Pan-African ambitions were continuously viewed by the West and NATO with suspicion and a threat to their ambition and influence in Africa. Gaddafi's efforts to mediate conflicts and promote unity were often perceived by the West as heavy-handed and self-serving, leading to accusations of interference and manipulation. His support for regimes not in alignment with Western-style democracy and rebel groups in mineral-rich countries such as Chad and Sudan placed him in direct confrontation with Western interest in the continent. Despite these criticisms, Gaddafi remained a prominent figure in African politics until his downfall, using his wealth and influence to shape the continent's political landscape and challenge Western domination. Throughout his rule, Muammar Gaddafi's confrontational stance towards the West earned him a reputation as a pariah in the international community. His anti-imperialist rhetoric, coupled with allegations of supporting terrorism and sponsoring insurgencies, made him a target for Western ire and intervention. The Lockerbie bombing in 1988, in which a Pan Am flight was brought down over Scotland, further cemented Gaddafi's image as a rogue leader and a threat to global security. However, the extent to which Gaddafi's actions justified Western intervention remains a subject of debate. While there is no denying the gravity of the accusations leveled against him, it is also important to consider the geopolitical context in which they arose. Gaddafi's defiance of Western hegemony, particularly in the oil-rich region of North Africa, posed a direct challenge to established power dynamics and economic interests. Thus, the demonization of Gaddafi by Western powers must be understood within the broader framework of geopolitical competition and the pursuit of strategic interests. From the outset of his rule, Gaddafi made no secret of his hostility towards Western imperialism and neo-colonialism. He viewed Western powers as the primary impediment to Africa's development and sought to challenge their influence through a combination of diplomatic maneuvering and military force. Gaddafi's support for anti-Western liberation movements and his efforts to promote Pan-African unity earned him the enmity of Western governments, who saw him as a destabilizing force in the region. Moreover, Gaddafi's pursuit of nuclear weapons and his alleged ties to terrorist organizations further heightened tensions with the West, leading to sanctions and diplomatic isolation. However, it is important to recognize that Gaddafi's relationship with the West was not always characterized by confrontation. In the years following the Lockerbie bombing, Gaddafi made efforts to mend relations with Western governments, including renouncing his weapons of mass destruction program and compensating the victims of the bombing. These gestures were met with cautious optimism by some Western leaders, who saw them as an opportunity to reintegrate Libya into the international community. Despite these challenges, Gaddafi continued to engage with the West on various fronts, including economic cooperation and counter-terrorism efforts. Libya's vast oil reserves made it an attractive partner for Western companies seeking to invest in the region, leading to a thaw in relations in the years leading up to the Arab Spring. Moreover, Gaddafi's role in combating terrorism, particularly in the wake of the September 11 attacks, earned him grudging respect from some Western leaders who saw him as a bulwark against extremist threats in the region. However, the Arab Spring and the subsequent NATO intervention in Libya marked a turning point in Gaddafi's relationship with the West. The popular uprisings that swept across the Middle East and North Africa in 2011 posed a formidable challenge to Gaddafi's regime, leading to widespread protests and calls for political reform. Sensing a moment of weakness and vulnerability, the West seized the opportunity and decided to act swiftly. The West-led United Nations Security Council authorized NATO to use all necessary means to protect civilians in Libya, leading to a military campaign that ultimately resulted in Gaddafi's overthrow and death. The NATO intervention in Libya sparked controversy and division within the international community, with some arguing that it set a dangerous precedent for future interventions and undermined Libya's sovereignty. Moreover, the lack of a coherent post-intervention strategy, including the failure to disarm militias and stabilize the country, contributed to the ongoing chaos and violence in Libya. As a result, the legacy of the Arab Spring and NATO intervention in Libya remains deeply contested, with many questioning whether the intervention ultimately served the interests of the Libyan people or simply exacerbated the country's problems. The Arab Spring, which swept across the Middle East and North Africa in 2011, posed a formidable challenge to Gaddafi's regime. As popular protests erupted in cities across Libya, Gaddafi's grip on power began to slip, prompting a crackdown on dissent. The Western media beamed graphic images of violence and human rights abuses, called for action to protect civilian lives and promote democracy. NATO intervention, authorized by the Western-led United Nations Security Council under the auspices of the Responsibility to Protect doctrine, sought to halt Gaddafi's onslaught and pave the way for a democratic transition. However, the intervention quickly evolved into a full-fledged military campaign aimed at regime change, sparking controversy and division within the international community. Gaddafi's capture and subsequent execution in October 2011 marked the end of an era, but also unleashed a wave of chaos and instability that continues to engulf Libya to this day. The direct consequences of NATO intervention, including the proliferation of armed militias, the collapse of state institutions, and the exacerbation of humanitarian crises, underscore the complexities of intervening in the affairs of sovereign states and the limitations of military force as a tool of regime change. The Arab Spring presented a unique set of challenges for Gaddafi, who found himself confronted with widespread popular unrest and demands for political reform. Gaddafi remained unbowed and refused to step down or negotiate with the Western-backed opposition. The NATO-led intervention in Libya marked a significant escalation in the Arab Spring, transforming what began as a peaceful uprising into a full-fledged civil war. While the stated aim of the intervention was to protect civilian lives and promote democracy, its execution raised serious questions about the motives and methods of the intervening powers. Critics accused NATO of overstepping its mandate and pursuing regime change under the guise of humanitarian intervention, leading to accusations of neo-colonialism and imperialism. Moreover, the lack of a coherent post-intervention strategy, including the failure to disarm militias and stabilize the country, contributed to the ongoing chaos and violence in Libya. As a result, the legacy of the Arab Spring and NATO intervention in Libya remains deeply contested, with many questioning whether the intervention ultimately served the interests of the Libyan people or simply exacerbated the country's problems. Gaddafi's death left a power vacuum in Libya's political landscape, unleashing a wave of violence, tribal rivalries, and external meddling. The once stable nation descended into a protracted civil war, characterized by widespread human rights abuses, mass displacement, and the proliferation of illicit activities. The failure of post-Gaddafi Libya to transition to a stable and inclusive political order highlights the challenges of nation-building in the aftermath of regime change. Moreover, the fragmentation of Libyan society along tribal, regional, and ideological lines has further exacerbated tensions and hindered efforts to achieve reconciliation and national unity. The legacy of Gaddafi's rule continues to loom large over Libya's present and future, shaping political dynamics and influencing the trajectory of the country's development. The aftermath of Gaddafi's demise has been characterized by chaos, instability, and violence on an unprecedented scale. The collapse of central authority and the proliferation of armed militias have created a security vacuum that has been exploited by extremist groups and criminal networks. Moreover, the lack of a functioning state has led to widespread human rights abuses, including arbitrary detention, torture, and extrajudicial killings. The humanitarian situation in Libya has deteriorated significantly since Gaddafi's death, with millions of people in need of assistance and protection. The failure of the international community to effectively address these challenges has only compounded the suffering of the Libyan people and further undermined prospects for peace and stability in the country. The demise of Muammar Gaddafi raises profound questions about the efficacy of foreign intervention and the complexities of nation-building in the aftermath of regime change. The Western-led campaign to oust Gaddafi may have achieved its short-term objectives, but at what cost? The long-term consequences of intervention, including the destabilization of Libya and the exacerbation of regional conflicts, underscore the inherent risks of intervening in the affairs of sovereign states. Moreover, the failure to plan for post-conflict reconstruction and reconciliation highlights the limitations of military force as a tool of regime change. As Libya continues to grapple with the legacy of Gaddafi's rule and the consequences of foreign intervention, the lessons learned from this tumultuous chapter in history will serve as a sobering reminder of the complexities of governance and the challenges of building a stable and prosperous future for all. Muammar Gaddafi's legacy is a complex and contested terrain, reflecting the contradictions and ambiguities of his rule. While he may have been hailed as a champion of anti-colonialism and Pan-Africanism by some, his authoritarian methods and confrontational tactics alienated many both at home and abroad. The events that led to his downfall highlight the enduring tensions between power, ideology, and geopolitics in the modern era. Moreover, the aftermath of his demise serves as a stark reminder of the challenges of nation-building and the limitations of foreign intervention in shaping the destinies of sovereign states. As Libya continues to grapple with the legacy of Gaddafi's rule and the consequences of foreign intervention, the path to peace and stability remains uncertain. However, one thing is clear: the lessons learned from the rise and fall of Muammar Gaddafi will continue to shape the future of Libya and the wider Middle East and Africa for generations to come. Kilimanjaro News Network would like to hear from you directly. Is Libya a better country today after NATO's intervention and the execution of Muammar Gaddafi? Does the present instability in Libya exactly what the West wanted to take advantage over Libya's resources? What do you make of all the other African leaders who stood silent while NATO conducted an onslaught on the Libyan people? Send us your messages. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to Kilimanjaro News Network, the authentic voice of Africa. Scan our QR code and visit our website for more news coverage and unique analysis. Kilimanjaro News Network broadcasts in Swahili, Arabic, English, and French.